Staff happiness is important, but staff happiness is not only about recognition, like time off, birthday celebrations, or anything else that you might do once in a while. Do you want your staff to be happy every day? Of course, the answer is yes. And there's an under the radar way to do it. And my guest today is going to explain it. I'm Carl White, principal at Mark Advisory Group, which is a healthcare marketing agency, and I'm also the host of Practice Care. The mission for both is the same, and that's to help private practice owners stay private. Let's face it, care is better when the provider owns the practice and has the most clinical freedom to make the decisions they think are best for the patient. It's different when somebody else owns the practice, whether it doesn't really matter who it is, but whether it's a hospital, a health system, owners in faraway lands, whoever they may be, usually, eventually, something about their own agenda creeps into the provider's ear, could create some sort of compromise in a clinical decision they have to make. Let's just keep it easy and better and keep other owners out to begin with. And my guest today is Shelly Coheley. Shelly is the founder of SC Practical Solutions. Her experience in healthcare spans over 30 years and includes managing multi-million-dollar physician practices, opening practices, merging practices, relocating practices, and in one case, opening a new multi-specialty practice in a rural community. Shelly utilizes her experience and analytical skills to focus on the regulations to maintain compliance within physician practices, forecast revenue challenges, and expense reduction. She is a certified national business healthcare consultant, among other accolades. Shelly, thank you for taking some time to come on Practice Care.
Well, thank you, Carl. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, and let's start where I start with every guest. Your bio, for the purposes of me reading it, is necessarily short. Like people to get to know you a bit better. I'm curious, I didn't say this in your bio, but up until about 2016, you were working in practices. And then at that point, you made a decision to say, I want to chuck all that and, open up my own gig instead. So fill us in a bit more, help us get to know you a bit better. But I'm curious why you sounded like you had a good run going. Why would you make this change?
Right. I was actually with a company that was owned by physicians, and we had multiple sites and multiple testing facilities and such. So it was a very challenging yet rewarding position to hold because I was always challenged on a daily basis. Nothing ever was the same. So I loved having those challenges. And as the practice grew and we, of course, as many practices, had some growing pains amongst physicians.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided
you don't say.
Yeah.
I'm shocked to hear that.
I decided at that point that maybe my creativity and challenges could expand with other practices. And it kind of took me down the path to move on my own and start some consulting.
All right. Okay, so let's get into it. So staff happiness isn't only about recognition. And I sort of asserted because those are intermittent things, right? The birthday's only once a year, work anniversaries, extra time off, holidays and such. So you're saying there's a more under the radar way to get at it for staff happiness every day. What is it?
Well, I know that a lot of us always think of culture, like you're saying, oh, I gave them a birthday cake, or I gave them, Good Friday off, or so, and it's something that the staff needs to fill year round. Mm-hmm. So a lot of things that most practices overlook is their training and development programs. Because as employees, we want to feel confident in our job. We want to feel like we're performing our best. We don't want to, be in fear of that we're doing things wrong, or patient care, that's even a higher stress. So if you want to make sure you're doing your job correctly and not create any situations with the patients. So I feel pretty strongly about the training and development. Basically, my usual standard comment when I walk into a practice is your practice is only as good as your training and development program.
Yeah. And what do you mean by that?
Well, basically, we all know the fear and anxiety of when we are thrown into something and we don't know what we're doing. It just creates so much stress. So, unfortunately, a lot of training programs that practices establish is Senior Susie, who's been doing it, 15 years this way, trains the employees. Well, if Senior Susie doesn't know what she's doing or hasn't kept up with the new changes, then each employee who comes in is trained inappropriately. We're familiar with the studies when you line up a line of individuals, and you tell the first individual a message that by the time it gets to the last individual, usually it's completely incorrect. A lot of times that's how the training of practices are.
So kind of word of mouth, kind of, right? Sort of oral history.
Right. Or if you have an employee who may not be very happy in their role right now, you know, that disgruntled employee is going to shower over to your new employee, and they're not going to really care if they're training them correctly or not, because they're unhappy. So they want everyone else around them unhappy. So it kind of deflates your new employees from really having a good training program and success at learning their responsibilities, which then creates the circle of unhappiness, and we kind of just keep going through it.
Yeah. And you could see the chatter, just, well, how do you, why do we do it this way? It always was, or we don't know any better. I don't know what kind of words they would use, but you'd see a lot of variability, right? How things get done. And, the odds that two people who are asked to do the same thing with no training do it the same way are what, zero? I mean, practically zero.
Right.
Yeah. And it just proliferates. So why this? Like you are strong on this training and development. I mean, that statement, you're only as good as your training and development, is a bold statement. Why that?
Because I feel like, for one thing, everyone needs a purpose. Everyone needs to feel good. And studies have shown that our happiness is based on progress. Well, if you're not progressing in your career, you're not progressing in your job because you don't have the tools to progress, you're going to eliminate the happiness from that equation.
Yeah.
So I think most employers don't really remember that tidbit, that progress is amongst multiple aspects of our lives. So it plays into our day-to-day, work life also.
And would you say, practices that don't have good training development, are they the majority, or would you say they're more the minority? And I'm wondering, if they're the majority, why? Like what's behind that?
I think just the factor of that practices are usually really busy. And so they're so focused on hurry up, get this person in, get them trained, get them up to speed. We need to see patients, so I think sometimes the lack of understanding of how important that first step is in the employee retention process.
Yeah. And, practice care, we say we zero in on the business side of private practice. This to me seems like just this massive topic that's just easy to overlook, right? We think of, what do you think of when you think of first with business, accounting, finance, the hard sort of parts of the org chart. But most small practices don't have an HR function. That's where you would jam this in. And so there's blind spot number one. And then for those that do, maybe they heap it on the practice manager, who's already got 16,000 hats to wear. So what's going to probably fall through the cracks first? There's problem number two. But yeah, if you show up every day and you're like, I'm not sure what to do here, still, it's going to fester. Absolutely. Absolutely. It makes a lot of sense. Now I kind of think it out loud.
Right. And then, like you had commented, if you're a new employee and you go to, let's say, Anne, and she does it one way and Susie does it a different way, but you were trained this way, you're kind of left in that quandary of, okay, which way is the correct way to do it?
Yeah.
And then unfortunately, some practice managers aren't always as skilled at educating versus demeaning the process, that the employee did it incorrectly. So then you also find cultures where employees don't feel safe to ask the question, or they're constantly in fear of doing it wrong because they don't want to have that, feedback. So it's extremely important to create a program that is consistent, organized, and the same throughout. So whenever we walk into a practice and there's training involved, which the majority of the time when you walk into a practice, you see certain faults and certain things that could improve on. We are a huge believer in visual training manuals. So we pretty much implement that with all of our clients. So it just kind of consists of organizing actually what the process is, but then taking the time to do step-by-step visual with the training manual. So if we're doing training on an EMR system, you'll see step-by-step screenshots in the manual of what to click on and where it will take you to the next screen and how to handle that. If it's something as simple as prepping a room for a procedure, patient room. It's taking pictures of how the room should be propped, where the utensils and equipment should be placed, so that when the physician comes in, he's prepared. So, taking those pictures as the new employees leaving the room, they can easily open the manual, see the picture, and glance around and say, yep, everything's in place where it should be. So we're huge on visual. That way also you're not having one person trained differently than another person. It's all exactly the same, which also creates that team environment amongst the employees because they're doing it all the same.
Yeah.
So there's not as many question marks, or if there's issues of something that happens out of the abnormal, they're more prepared because they all have the same background and training to kind of help each other out.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've brought a client example to sort of illustrate this, because the before and after for this is like a softer topic, right? It's hugely important, but it's not like crunching numbers. It's a softer topic. So take us through that, this client that you worked with on this topic.
Okay, so I got a call from like a physician's wife, basically, that her practice isn't doing well. The employees are kind of like a revolving door, doesn't understand. The practice manager isn't doing her job, just kind of the typical call of, we're having issues and we don't know what to do. So I go in and I usually interview the staff, which is something I feel like the practice manager should do routinely, or like evaluations and such, because if the staff feel like they're in a safe environment that they can speak openly and candidly, you'd be surprised at some of the conversations that happen.
You just said that out loud, did you? Yeah.
Yeah. So, all of a sudden they're just like, it's flowing. And there's been several times where I've had staff in tears and such because they get into the nitty gritty of what's actually happening. Because a lot of times in an environment like that, where there's such a huge turnover, there's some common denominators. And a lot of times it's fear to speak openly. And so to finally have that opportunity that they have the confidence that you're not going to repeat anything, it just kind of opens the floodgates per se.
So do you walk in with like stress balls and Kleenex box just in case, if it sounds like partial therapist also.
Right. I always make sure there's a box of tissue on the desk nearby.
You put it in front of them. Why is that there? Give me 10 minutes and you'll be,
Right. You'll understand. So identifying, obviously, after the beginning of meeting the employees, and probably three of the most common denominators was lack of training, demeaning feedback, and just the instability of everyone coming and going throughout the practice. So we obviously dove in and started right away with kind of putting the physician's wife more in the clinical role, because she did have a clinical involvement in the practice, and helping her kind of step back from more of the administrative role and interacting with the staff, because there was a lot of fear of interacting with her. So
really
kind of removing
that just made it harder, didn't it?
Yeah. So kind of removing that from the equation, you could kind of feel the sense of the employees already taking a little bit of a sigh and a breath. But then starting with the training manuals was very next thing, because a lot of the fear was because they weren't trained and they were expected to be up to speed within 1 to 2 weeks. They were expected to be able to perform their job efficiently. Wow. And then if they didn't, they would get the feedback. So that was the first step, was creating the visual training manuals, which we incorporate the senior employees also, because then it gives them a sense of worth and collaboration in the process of training.
So they were kind of building them.
Yes, so they were helping to build with us, because they're in the trenches every day. They know what's happening in the practice. We're coming in. So we do rely on the senior employees some, because they have the day-to-day knowledge, and we find that it makes them feel more fulfilled and kind of more confident that they were part of this program. And when it's completed, they have a sense of accomplishment, like, wow, look at what we achieved. Like, look at how great this manual looks. Like, I wish I would have had this when I came, know. So creating those manuals, the pictures, the screenshots, and all of that then we took the employees who were struggling, who weren't trained properly, and basically pulled them from the live environment and pulled them into an office or a training environment, recreated dummy patients and such to kind of retrain them, build back up their confidence so that they felt that they could actually go back into the live environment.
Okay.
So we do it as kind of a 3-step process, I guess 4 if you count creating the manual. We create the manual, we then pull the employees who need to be retrained, retrain them in a safe environment, a dummy environment. And then it also is put in the sense of you can ask as many questions as you want. You're not going to be judged on how many questions you ask. You know, if they make an error, it's taken more as an educational approach, you know, like, okay, try it this way, because if you do it this way, this is where you end up type thing. And then we team them up with a senior staff member in the live environment, but we do not let them loose until they've been tested out on each of their responsibilities. At that point, they've got their confidence, we've got the confidence in them that they can actually handle the live environment. Because we all know every day dealing with patients and such, there's always going to be something that happens that wasn't covered in training.
Correct.
So they have to at least have the base knowledge and confidence to be able to handle that.
And about how long from start to finish did this take?
Like in a start to finish of working with those staff members, I would say we were able to probably have them fully trained within a month, where they were smiling and confident, completely on their own. It depends on practice to practice, because it has to allow being able to take those members of the team and remove them from the situation. So it kind of depends on the practice itself, how much time they can allocate these people being removed from live environment to actually have that one-on-one training, and then having a senior person be able to team up with them. So, you know, sometimes we do, you know, introduce some Saturdays where if there's a lot of staff that needs to be retrained, where we just call a half-day Saturday, like, okay, we're doing classroom environment. Bring their coffee and, you know, we're going to sit down 4 hours non-interrupted. Let's go through it.
And did you find, you know, the example you said earlier about there's 3 people who have to do something and they do it 3 different ways. Did you find that too?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I had one employee, she was so petrified of making a mistake, and she was trained one way. The previous wife of the physician had showed her differently, and then her co-worker sitting next to her was doing it differently also, and she was just like, I don't know what to do. I'm like, she was so afraid to move forward in any direction that it just left her sitting there kind of like almost in tears of, I don't know which direction to go. So,
And what was the turnover rate before you started this?
Well, let's just say that when I first spoke with the practice, and by the time we were able to kind of come on board about 3 weeks later, and then within my first 2 weeks of doing interviews and working with the practice, there were 6 people who left.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And this is
out of about how many?
This is a practice that fully staffed was at about 18 employees.
A third. Holy cow.
So.
And that was because of the, you know, just the environment, the totality of what you were walking into.
The lack of training and just the volatility of it. I mean, I had 2 individuals that were started literally like the first day I came into the practice, and each of them left before their 2 weeks.
And they never know, like, did this practice, and was that typical? A third's a lot, but you said revolving door.
No, and this environment, it was amazing to me because they were actually getting competent people to come work for them. And then, you know, they were out the door. And I speak to so many practices that are having such a difficult time getting qualified staff. And then I go up to this practice and I'm like excited because it's like, wow, you have a great team of staff here. Like, I don't always see this. And then to watch them leave was disheartening. Like, wait, don't leave yet. Don't leave yet. But you know, they just felt like, no, you know, One was in a clinical environment, and she was kind of like, I got like 2 days of training. They're expecting me to do all this stuff. I'm not comfortable. I'm out type thing.
I had a different guest on who talked about A players. How do you get A players? How do you keep A players? And what came through was, A players just want a few things. They want to know what's the goal? How do I get there? And then let me go do it. What are the guardrails? What are the lines I
Mhm.
can't cross? Kind of give me the guidelines and then let me go. Measure me. How am I doing? And it makes me wonder, as you were saying that, I wonder if some of those were, you know, better players and they just took a look. Whereas somebody weaker might say, well, I got to stick it out. Whereas somebody better might say, I see what's happening here. I'm going to go
Right.
look. I wonder, we'll never know, but I wonder.
Right. And I
Yeah.
think too, from my experience, that a lot of times, everyone's personality, everyone's strengths are different.
Hmm.
So sometimes identifying the right person and putting them in the right role
Hmm.
is in itself an important part of all this. Because if
Hmm.
you're interviewing someone for a front desk person where they're going to be greeting patients all the time, but they're an extremely meek, quiet person, no matter how great their skills are, they're
Hmm.
not going to be your best fit for your front desk.
Yeah.
I think during the interview process, also being able to identify people's strengths and weaknesses and then allocating the correct role for them is
Yeah.
important. So,
Did you
because
find during this that any staff just had to go like this? They didn't want to do it the new way. For whatever reason, it just became
um,
clear. Yeah.
actually, typically that is kind of the scenario.
Yeah.
And actually, in this office, the staff were so desperate for anything to improve it that they were extremely supportive because, a lot of times as a consultant coming in, most people look at you, fear you, and think, oh God, here we go, we got to make
Hmm.
all these changes.
Hmm.
And it was extremely rewarding to see the staff just smiles and
Okay.
jump in like, great, okay, yes, let's
Yeah.
do this.
Yeah.
And I think too, like I said, of making them part of the process gave them even more confidence and self-esteem of like, wow, she's actually asking our opinion. She wants us involved, and it helped bring the
Yeah.
team together even more.
Yeah. I mean, as I was prepping for this episode, I was thinking, get the buy-in, and what
Mhm.
better way than you two do this every day. Let's have you do just a good training manual looks like this. So
Right.
please, work it. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So what's it like there now, or after you were done, say 6 months later? Turnover was a
There
disaster, culture was a disaster. Now, what's it like now?
much happier staff, more retention. I actually promoted a few staff members within, to kind of help compensate with the physician's wife going into the clinical arena. Unfortunately, the practice manager wasn't a good fit at the end of all this, so we were in the process of replacing her. So we did kind of promote some within, like an front office coordinator, a clinical coordinator, which then even boosted morale even more because they were seeing like, oh, we're promoting within, like
Hmm.
I feel so much better. I got a very slight increase and I have these responsibilities, but more the fact of they believe that I could do this. And
Yeah.
so staff morale definitely jumped. I mean, we also did the typical things of, the employee appreciation week, type of
Sure.
things of acknowledging the employees, just kind of giving more positive feedback when they were doing things correctly, and
Hmm.
just the encouragement and the building of it. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
How did it go with changing the wife's role, the spouse's? I said wife.
Um,
Is that what?
yes.
Yeah.
Actually, she was relieved and excited because she was overwhelmed
Ah.
trying to deal with the the administrative side while still building her clinical portion.
Hmm.
So she was raising the white flag too, like, I can't keep doing this.
Hmm.
So it was kind of a win-win situation for everyone. And, in respect to her, she had a lot on her plate. And so if an employee wasn't catching on after 2 weeks, she was ready to be like, okay, you're out, I don't have time for you to not catch on this quickly.
Yeah.
Not really understanding that by not having any structured training manuals and such, that they were somewhat being set up for failure. And
Yeah.
her frustration was also being set up for continuous frustration.
Right. Right.
So it was kind of, at the end of the day, it was a win-win for her. It was a win-win for the staff. She was able to finally relax and kind of smile again also. So it wasn't
Right.
just from the staff standpoint, it was also from her standpoint.
Right. Cool. Really interesting. It's a good story. These sorts of examples are great because they help people understand and see some of the nuts and bolts and the insides. Is there anything you think I should have asked you about this example that I just didn't ask? Any other tidbit that you think people need to know about?
I don't think so. I mean, I think basically training is a huge foundation of your practice. So, and people just so much, like you indicated, they just overlook it as not really being part of staff retention and, happiness. The more progress and the more rewarded the staff feel, just not necessarily like you said with birthday cakes and such, but just their own self-worth of feeling confident in their job. They tend to be more loyal to the company. They're going to stay longer. They're going to work harder. They're going to stay later if they need to, because they want to be loyal, because they're happy. They're happy in their job.
Yeah. Big deal. Absolutely. The other question I ask every guest as kind of a wrap up is, so, we've caught somebody's attention either because you've opened their eyes about the true state of their practice, or it's been on their mind, but they just don't know where to get started. What are one or two practical tips, simple things they could do to get going from the starting line and get moving down the path of bringing this kind of stuff in?
I think probably interacting with the staff a little bit, questioning them, do you feel like you're appropriately trained? Is there any other things that you feel like you require training on? Do you feel fulfilled in your role? Can you expand and take on more activities, or do you feel overwhelmed in your role? If they are, kind of why? And just looking at their own training program, do they have a solid training and development program in place?
Yeah. And maybe the question there is there anything that we require our staff to do that we actually have written down to show them? And if the answer is no, then you don't have one, and just stop there. Or do we have multiple versions? Or for this task, do we have one way to do it? Or do we have 6 ways to do it? If the answer is more than one, whether you think you have training or you don't, so maybe it's just the opening the eyes. Cool. Awesome. Thank you.
Or is it like 5 years outdated?
There's another one. Yeah. So we just changed EMRs, or we went to the new version of the EMR and they moved a bunch of stuff around. Are the training when you were talking about taking pictures of, like the clinical, like the exam rooms. And I'm thinking, oh my God, they can't remodel those rooms, or they can, but they have to make sure that they whip out the training manuals and take new pictures and just make sure it's up to date. Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, that's funny. Important, but kind of funny. Cool. Well, Shelly, this is awesome. I love these topics, these hugely important, but unfortunately very commonly under the radar issues that any business faces. We focus on health, on private practices here, but this could apply to anybody. So I'm glad that you came on and shed some light on this. Thanks so much for coming on.
Well, thank you so much, Carl.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got contact info for you. We're going to put those in the show notes for this episode. If anybody wants to get a hold of Shelly, find out more, talk to her about coming into your practice, see what that would look like, that's where you can find her. And a couple of other points before we wrap up. First, if you are someone like Shelly or us that seeks to help private practice owners in one way or another, or if you are a private practice owner yourself and you've figured out something on the business side of private practice, whatever it might be that you think others would benefit from, in either case, we want you to come on Practice Care and tell the world about it. In the show notes for Shelly's episode, in every show notes episode, there's a link, a couple of questions. Tell us what's on your mind so that we can get you scheduled as soon as possible. And finally, if you haven't done it yet, you got to subscribe to Practice Care. We're on Apple, Spotify, Google. Now we're on YouTube, Amazon. We're on just about every major platform. We do a new episode a week. If you subscribe, you're going to get up to date and stay up to date with all those new episodes. Thanks very much. And until next time.